Alright, welcome back to another video in the Grappling Hook tutorial series using Construct 3. In this video we are going to create some visual effects. And the first thing that I am going to do is add a spark effect. So the idea is when our grappling hook hits the floor, this red collision instead of the blue collision, I want the end of the grappling hook, the target that we shoot out, to spark on contact. So I'm actually going to go to our meta tab. This is going to have to exist in our project when it loads. So I'm just going to start it out in our meta layout. Just double click anywhere on the layout and let's scroll down to under the general category. We have particles. Let's insert a particle. I'm going to insert it over here because my background is darker over here, and we're going to need that to see what we're doing. I'm going to resize it to 3 pixels by 3 pixels and zoom way in. And then I'm going to grab a gray color and my pencil tool. I'm just going to put 1 pixel right in the middle. All right. Exit out of that. I'm going to rename it particle underscore spark. Change the angle to 270 so that it's shooting straight up in the air. Just for our preview purposes, we will adjust what angle it fires from in code. I'm going to zoom in, and with it selected here in the properties, we can change some things. So I'll hit preview. 50 is way too high of a rate, and it's on continuous spray. I'm going to change the rate to, I'll say 10, and continuous spray to 1 shot. And that spray cone, I'm going to widen it from 60 to 80. I'll hit preview, and the size is awfully big. I'm going to take it down to 3 pixels. That's what I'm looking for. 10 might be a little much. I'm going to go 8. That should do. I'm going to leave the speed at 200. The size, we set that already. Opacity at 100. And the acceleration, let's lower that even more. It's at minus 150. I'm going to say minus 500. I want it to time out before it starts coming back in, but I'm starting to get the effect that I want. So timeout, I'm going to go, let's say 0.3. Okay, let's see, minus 650. I think that's more along the lines of what I'm looking for. I want something that looks like when 2 pieces of metal come in contact with each other and it makes a spark. Maybe just 600. I like that better. So a speed of 200, size of 3, acceleration minus 600, and then our speed randomizer at 800, and fade to invisible, 0.3 for the timeout, and I have a rate of 8 and a spray cone of 80, and it is a 1 shot. I'm going to zoom out. I'm just going to move this on to the layout. Let's go over to our event sheet, and I want this to appear when we hit the floor collisions. So in our grapple collisions group, we have our on collision with floor, or it travels more than 500 pixels. So the good thing here is if it travels more than 500 pixels, it won't be on screen. The spark can play, and it doesn't really matter because we'll never see it. But I definitely want it here where we make collision with the floor. So to get our particle to appear on screen, instead of using the system to create it, I'm going to use the target itself to create it. So let's add an action and go into our objects, grab our grappling target, type in spawn, and I want to spawn another object from the target. That object will be our particle spark. Let's put that on the objects layer. And the image point will be 0. I'm going to move that all the way to the top of this block. And let's test that out and see what we got so far. So when I shoot it at the ground, you can see that spark kick out like that. And that's a pretty cool effect how it is, but it's not how I want it to appear, because you see it makes contact and it shoots off to the right. And even if I shoot it this way, it still shoots off to the right. So it's just shooting at its default angle. Let's add another action to this block and grab our particle spark. And I want to set the angle. And instead of telling it specifically an angle in degrees, I'm going to grab the angle from the grappling target. We're going to access the angle through the bullet behavior. So I'll type in obj grap target, and then we want the bullet behavior, so dot bullet, and then we want the angle of the bullet behavior, so dot angle of motion. Okay, so let's hit done, and I'm going to slide that up underneath our spawn action there. We can test that. You can see that it is shooting out to the left this time. To the right, to the left. And then if I shoot it up here, you can see the spark is actually shooting through the floor. And I actually want it to come the opposite way, because if I just jump straight up and shoot down, you see the spark goes down through the floor. So that's not what I want. What I want is the exact opposite of everything that it was doing. So let's go back into this, and we want to subtract half of a full rotation. At the end of this equation, we can just subtract 180. That way it'll turn it around the opposite direction. So now the spark is coming the opposite way. And we can shoot it up here. There you go. You can certainly play around with that. Okay, we need to put it in a few more places. Let's go over to our Functions tab. When we call for the grapple cancel function, that means we are less than 80 pixels in distance to a collision, so it cancels the grappling altogether, but our grappling target still shoots out. So when the target makes contact with something, I want that spark to fire. So let's add an action, and let's go grab our target, and we can spawn another object, and that's going to be our particle, and the layer will be objects, image point is 0, and I'm going to move this to the top because I want this to fire off the particle before we destroy the object, because if we destroy the target object, then we won't have an object to spawn this from. So let's go ahead and add another action, grab our spark particle, and let's set the angle, and we want to type in that same equation. So let's get our obj target dot bullet to get the bullet behavior, and then dot angle of motion to get the angle of motion from our bullet, and then we want to subtract 180. Okay, we can drag that right up underneath our spawn. And then down here with grapple break, when we are attached and it begins retracting and we're swinging, our bar that we created in the last video, when it runs out, it cancels us our grapple breaks. I think this is a good place to use the spark again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight both of these actions. I'm going to hold Control on the keyboard, click and drag down a copy. And I actually drag that one down. I want these to fire first, and then it can start doing everything else. One last thing we need to do, go over to our meta event sheet, and on start a layout, we have destroyed the target. We can do the same thing with our spark. So add an action, grab our spark, type in destroy, and we're all set. I'm going to move on to the grappling vine. So while we're here on the layout, I'm going to lock collisions, and I'm going to unlock objects, make sure it's highlighted. Over here in this corner, we have our vines, our angle, and our vine that we swing from. Over here in the project panel, I'm going to highlight our obj grab vine, right click on it, and I'm going to clone, and then select the object, and then we can rename it. I'm going to call this obj underscore grap trail. We're going to need this on the meta layer eventually, so let's go ahead over to the meta layer, and I'm going to drag an instance of our grap trail out onto the layout. Okay, and then in our event sheet, we want to create a trail that follows the target, because right now what we have is just the target that shoots out and then the vine appears when the target makes contact. And our vine is always there. We just make it visible and invisible in the code once we change its position. So let's go into our grappling launch. So in this top block here, let's add the trail to our grappling target object. So add an action in this block, and in our OBJ file, let's grab our grappling target. We can spawn another object from the target, and that object will be our OBJ grap trail, and the layer will be objects and the image point 0. So if we did that now, you see our cloned grappling vine is just swinging off in space, and that is because if we go over to our meta layout and click on our grap trail object over here in behaviors, we still have the sign behavior attached to it because we cloned it. So go into edit behaviors and just delete that. Back on the event sheet, once we have created it, we want to tell it to follow the grappling target. And we're going to have to do that every frame that the game is playing because the target is constantly moving until it attaches. So down here where it says add event to grappling launch, that will add an event inside the group. So add an event and go into system and type in every tick. We want to set the position to that target. So add an action, go into our OBJ file, grab our grap trail object, and we want to set position. Let's set it to another object. And that way we can just pick the target object and the image point will be 0. So if we play that, now it stays with the target. Okay, add an action, go into our objects folder, grab the OBJ trail, and I want to set the angle toward a position. So the trail object is attached from its origin point to the target. So I want the rest of that vine to point towards the player so that it looks like it is coming from his hand. So we'll need the X and Y value of our player. OBJ, grab our player. Let's set it to the image point that we set up on our player's hand. So dot image point X, parentheses, that's going to be image point 1. And then the same thing for the Y. Grab our player object, get the image point for Y, and image point 1. And that's in this same every tick event. So that's going to update every frame. And now it's constantly pointing at the image point of our player object. Okay. Now let's make it look like it's actually coming out of his hands. So we need to change the width. Every frame of the game, the width is going to change because the target's getting further and further away from our player's hand. Let's add an action. And in our OBJ folder, let's grab the trail again. And now we want to set the width. And for the width, we're going to use an expression. And that expression is going to calculate the distance between the grappling target and the image point of our player's hand. Type in the expression distance, and then we'll put a beginning parentheses. And as we've seen before in this project, when we use an expression, we have to put some values in between our parentheses. So the first point is going to be our player's hand. So let's type in our OBJ player object dot image point, and that'll be the image point X, and that's image point 1. Then we'll separate that with a comma, and we'll type it in for the Y. So OBJ player dot image point Y, image point 1. Separate that with a comma. Now it wants the X and Y of the other point to calculate the distance to. So from our player's image point, which is his hand, to the target. And instead of using the target, we can actually just use the origin point of the vine trail object that we just created. So let's type in the obj grap trail dot x, then separate that with a comma, and then obj grap trail dot y, and then end our parentheses. So it's going to calculate the distance between the X and Y of our player's hand and the X and Y of the grappling trail vine. And it's going to do that every frame of the game. So let's play that. And there's our vine. And it is constantly changing its width to match the distance between our player's image point and where the target originally landed. Okay, let's exit out of that. Obviously, we don't want it to be on screen the whole time. So we know that when we collide, we either destroy and reset our variables or we connect. So let's start up here with our collision. If we collide with the floor or go past 500 pixels, I want to get rid of our trail. So let's add an action, go grab our trail object and type in destroy. And I'm going to move that up here when we destroy our target. And then after we connect, we already have a vine that we swing from. We don't want that showing, so we can destroy it down here as well. And I'm going to let all of this happen first, and then as soon as we make our grapevine visible, then we can destroy our trail. So add an action, go into our folder, grab the trail object, type in destroy, and let's move that up right under set grapevine to visible action. Okay, let's test that out. There we go. We just have the one now. All right. Now, pretty cool effect. I like it, but we could make it better. Construct 3 provides quite a few effects to use. So in our meta layout, we have our grap trail object. Now that we have it in our meta layout, we can adjust all of its properties, and it will take effect every time it is spawned throughout the game. Make sure it is selected in your project panel, and then in the properties, scroll down to effects. Let's edit effects and add a new effect. And then if we scroll down towards the bottom, you'll see a section called distortion. And we have a bunch of warp effects. And I'm going to go with warp object. And it says down here, an animated wave distortion for objects. Sounds like what I want. So we'll add that. In the properties panel, we have our warp object effects. We can change some parameters. I'm going to zoom in real close. You can see that it has already taken effect. I'm going to stretch it out for now so we can see the effect a little better. So we can mess with the frequency. Let's see if we double it. So you can kind of see what it does. I guess that's the Y frequency. If I put it at 15, you see it gives it more waves. But I'm going to take that down to, I think, 4. And then the amplitude, that's going to be, so I'm going to drop that down to 3. I'm going to scroll back up and I'm going to change the size of the width back to 32. And let's go to our layout and play. So, not bad. At least it looks more like a rope being tossed out now. But we can change that a little more back in our meta layout. Select the object. I'm going to change the speed. I'll change the X speed and the Y speed both to 5. And then back on our layout, let's play the game. Much better. So the wave happens a lot faster. And it looks like the rope or the vine is uncoiling as he throws it out. So that is the vine effect. Looking pretty good. Okay, let's exit out of that. Okay, actually, I'm going to play this again because I want to show you something. When I launch a long distance, my player starts swinging below our floor. And as long as we are updating his position every frame, the floor is not going to stop us as a collision because we're telling it manually to change its position 60 times every second. But the problem we could run into is if we throw it and I try to dismount whenever I'm overlapping. So you can see here that I dismounted and I landed in the middle of a collision. So, I can try to launch my grappling. You can see the sparks. You can see me try to move. Nothing's happening. I don't want our player getting stuck in the ground collision. So we can take care of that and it will never happen again. So up here in our player controls, I'm going to drop down that group, scroll all the way towards the bottom. At the bottom of the group, I'm going to add an event to player controls group. And let's go grab our player object. And I want to check to see if he is overlapping another object. And if he is overlapping the collision floor, if he's colliding with the floor, the platform behavior is going to detect that. And we'll still be able to move and control our player. But if we are overlapping the collision floor, then I want to make it to where our player does not get stuck. And we're going to do that by setting our player's Y position. Add an action. Let's go grab our player. And I want to set Y. And the Y position is going to be the collision floor object. So collision floor dot Y. We want to get the Y position on screen of our collision floor object. And then we can subtract the height of our player. So minus obj player dot height. And that will calculate the pixel height of our player and move it that distance above our collision floor. I don't know if I'll be able to get this to play just right, but there it is. So our guy just popped right up out of the ground and did not get stuck in the floor. And I'm going to highlight one of these, control click, drag down a copy, and edit that. I'm going to say prevent player from getting stuck in floor collision. One last thing while we are changing the way things work visually in our game. A few videos back, we added some animations of our idle and jump animations with our player's arm sticking out. And we named them grap idle and grap jump. So what we have right now is our player idle and the grappling hook trail just comes out of his body. So one way we can check for that when our grapple launched variable is set to true. So let's add an event to player controls, go into system. We want to compare a variable of grapple launched and we want to know if it's true. So when it is equal to 1, right click on this event, add a sub event. Now we can go grab our player, scroll down to platform, and we want to know if he is on the floor or not. So grab is on floor. So when our player is on the floor and the grapple has been launched, then we know we want to play the idle version. So add an action, go grab our player, and we can set the animation, grap idle. And then if we just highlight this whole block of code, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. Now if we just highlight just the event and press I on the keyboard, that will invert it with that little X right there. That means if the player is not on the floor and the grappling has been launched, then we can play the animation where he is jumping and throwing the grapple. Let's go into that and let's change this animation to any grap jump. That should get us set up with that. Copy one of these down here and make myself a note and say grapple throwing animations. And then we can test it. And idle, our guy sticks his hand out and throws it. And then when we jump, we have the jumping animation of him launching. Visually and mechanically, the game is set up. I'm going to end this one here. I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to save.